Canine German Shepherds discovered a forest ranger bound to a tree. What occurred next will bring tears to your eyes. A well-trained pack of canine German Shepherds was on a standard drill in the snowy mountains when an unfathomable event took place. Their handler, momentarily distracted, lost track of them. Guided solely by their instincts and loyalty, the dogs ventured into the dense forest. That's when they found him, a man who was barely awake, bloody and bruised, with chains digging into his wrists as he dangled helplessly from a frozen tree. It was a ranger abandoned in the wilderness. Instead of running off or barking wildly, the dogs performed an unexpected act. What ensued was a sequence of actions that were remarkably precise, deeply touching, and truly human, which brought experienced officers to tears. This tale is more than just about survival. It conveys a profound message of trust, bravery, and the realization that sometimes those we believe need us the most are the ones who save us. Before we dive in, remember to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and activate notifications. That's how we can keep sharing these unforgettable stories of loyalty, resilience, and the extraordinary bond between people and dogs that transcends all challenges. The snow had been falling for hours, covering the trails of Bitter Creek National Reserve beneath a glistening white layer. Few dared to come to this part of Wyoming in the depths of winter save for rangers like Thomas Grady. At the age of 42, Thomas dedicated 2 decades to safeguarding the land, wildlife, and visitors who passed through. However, today he was not on a patrol, he was not chasing poachers or assisting lost hikers, he was chained to a tree. His breath came out in short, chilly bursts. Blood dripped from a wound on his temple, streaming down to his frostbitten cheek. Heavy chains bound his chest and arms, fastening him against the gnarled pine, as if he were a part of it. His wrists were tied behind him, raw and split from struggling. His uniform was torn and soaked in a mixture of blood and melted snow. He could no longer feel his fingers and was barely clinging to consciousness. It had been 2 days since he had been ambushed. He remembered the angry voices muffled under ski masks, demanding access to the reserve land for illegal hunting, logging, and anything else that could be obtained in the shadows. Thomas refused, and they made him an example, leaving him in the woods to freeze and vanish without a trace. But something was approaching. At first it was just a whisper in the breeze, followed by soft thuds crunching through the snow. Thomas opened his swollen eyes. Was it another illusion? The cold had been deceiving him for hours. He squinted, trying to distinguish reality from the trees. That's when he spotted them. 5 shapes moved against the white snow, appearing dark and low as they progressed steadily. Panic filled his chest at first. Wolves, he thought. Memories of survival training flooded his mind. Stay still. Do not show fear. But as the figures came near, he recognized they weren't wild animals. They were German Shepherds trained as 9 Bosnia and Herzegovina convertible marks. Their thick coats were dusted with snow, and their eyes glinted alertly, sharp and golden. Each one moved with intention, resembling soldiers on a mission rather than strays. One, larger than the others, stepped forward to sniff the air. He locked gazes with Thomas. Then something unexpected occurred. The dog didn't bark or growl, but instead positioned itself directly in front of Thomas, ears up and chest proud, resembling a statue. Another dog approached, sniffing around the base of a nearby tree, while another patrolled the perimeter. The remaining dogs arranged themselves in a tactical formation. These animals were not wandering, they were trained. Tears welled in the corners of Thomas's eyes, partly due to emotion and partly from the biting wind. He couldn't voice much, but he softly murmured, "Oh, good boys." The alpha dog, marked with a scar on his left eye, came closer and sniffed at the chain binding Thomas. The dog barked once, a sharp, short sound that resonated through the trees. Thomas wasn't sure if anyone would respond, but the dogs reacted. One began to dig in the snow around the chain, uncovering the padlock, while another barked towards the sky, possibly signaling for help. It felt as if they understood what needed to be accomplished. Minutes seemed to stretch endlessly as Thomas drifted in and out of awareness. Just before he slipped back into darkness, he heard it. Distant voices and footsteps crunching through the woods, followed by a human voice, urgent in tone, said, "See him over here." Thomas could barely raise his head, but through the haze of snow and agony, he glimpsed a police officer, accompanied by other handlers advancing through the trees. The dogs had succeeded in bringing assistance. As Thomas's sight began to fade, he caught one last look at the alpha dog standing nearby, watching him, not with curiosity or uncertainty, but with a sense of comprehension. Then darkness took over. Thomas regained consciousness, confronted by the sharp aroma of antiseptic and the steady beeping of a heart monitor. Pain surged through his body as if every bone and nerve had been hammered. He blinked slowly, the bright fluorescent lights of the infirmary and the ranger station hurting his eyes. The warmth felt excessive after enduring days in the freezing outdoors, making his skin feel overly sensitive. A nurse appeared at his side. "Oh, you're safe now," she spoke softly. "You're lucky." "They discovered you just in time," Thomas attempted to talk, but his voice emerged as a rasp. "The dogs! Where are the dogs?" She smiled. "They're outside, the K9 unit that found you. They have been waiting, especially one of them. The large one with the scar." Thomas let his head rest back on the pillow. It was not a dream. The 9 Bosnia and Herzegovina convertible marks were real. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Dalton entered, his expression showing a mix of relief and controlled anger. Dalton was a tough man in his 50s, solid like an oak and equally steadfast. Grady," he grunted, pulling a chair closer. "Oh, so you have quite a story to share." Thomas nodded slowly. "How did they find me?" Dalton leaned back, arms folded. "Our K9 team was doing a winter training exercise in the eastern woods. They got separated from their handler during a sudden whiteout. We thought they were lost until they returned on their own, but not to the checkpoint. They came back to the main station, barking like moles covered in snow. One of the handlers, Rachel Vance, sensed something was amiss. She trusted them, hopped on the ATV and followed them. They brought her right to you," and Thomas shut his eyes, feeling tightness in his chest. "They saved my life," Dalton agreed. "Yeah, but here's where it turns odd." He pulled out a folder from under his arm and opened it. Inside was a map of the forest with handwritten notes. "None of you were tied to a tree in an area that hasn't been patrolled in over 5 years. No active trails, no campsites, no fire roads. Whoever did this to you knew exactly where to leave someone they didn't want found." Thomas tightened his jaw. "Illegal activities. They wanted me silenced. And they almost succeeded," Dalton muttered. "We'll locate them. But there's something else." Dalton rose and opened the door to the hallway. A moment later, a large German shepherd padded in, calm and steady, his scarred eyes still alert. He paused in the doorway, ears up, then walked directly to Thomas's bed and rested his head gently on the mattress. "Meet Valor," Dalton introduced. "An 8-year-old decorated military K9 who retired after his handler was killed in action. And since then he's struggled to adapt. He doesn't bond, doesn't trust, but for some reason he has chosen you." And Thomas reached out, his hand shaking as he touched the dog's thick neck. Valor closed his eyes and leaned into the touch as if it was the only warmth he had ever experienced. Rachel Vance, the handler, entered next. She was in her early 30s, with deep brown eyes and snow-white hair styled in a tight braid. "Valor's never acted like this before," she said, her voice filled with wonder. Not since he lost his partner. It's like something changed in him when he found you." Thomas glanced from her to the dog, his heart feeling heavy. "I wasn't just another rescue for him. He understood my feelings. Rachel, he stayed beside you the entire time, refusing to move until we got you out on the sled. Even then, he kept glancing back at you, as if unsure whether we were trustworthy. Thomas turned to Valor and said, "You saved me. You chose me." Just when that warmth of gratitude set in, the door swung open abruptly. A deputy entered with a pale face and a trembling voice. "Sheriff, something is wrong. We found new tire tracks near Sector 12 and recently cut chains. Someone was there last night." Dalton's face became serious. "They have returned." Thomas straightened up, pain shooting through his ribs. "They believe I'm still out there. They are wrapping up loose ends." The room fell silent. The lure stood still, ears perked and tail straight. Something was approaching. The ranger station had never felt so still. Outside, snow continued to fall gently in rhythmic patterns, covering the trees with a fresh white coat. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Deputies whispered behind closed doors while Sheriff Dalton hadn't left the communications room since discovering the new tire tracks. Whatever was going on out there, whoever was back, they were not done yet. Thomas sat on a wooden bench by the side window, wrapped in a thermal blanket. His hands remained bandaged, and deep bruises marred his jaw and ribs, yet his mind was sharper now. He couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was holding its breath. Something was lurking beneath the silence. Valor lay at his feet like a guard, not asleep, never asleep, just breathing steadily. The scar across his eye made him seem intimidating to many, but to Thomas, that scar represented a more profound tale. Pain, yes, but also survival. Rachel Vance entered quietly, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Still refusing painkillers?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Thomas accepted the cup, his fingers brushing against hers. "They make my head feel foggy. I can't afford that at the moment." She sat next to him, speaking softly. "We're involving federal investigators. This case is more than poaching. It's too coordinated and too clean. Someone had maps, equipment, and the audacity to leave a man for dead." Thomas looked down at Valor, and someone made a mistake. Rachel followed his gaze. "Valor wasn't meant to be there. None of them were, but they found me. They weren't lost, they were directed here." Rachel appeared confused. "No one sent them." Thomas leaned in a little closer. Then something else did. There was a pause, not filled with doubt, but with understanding. Rachel had dedicated years to training K-9 S&I units. She recognized when things exceeded typical explanation. "He hasn't left your side for a second," she said softly. "Even when I call, he waits for your go-ahead." Thomas looked at the dog. "He reminds me of the kind of ranger I used to be before everything changed. Loyal, relentless, always attentive." Rachel paused, then asked, "Do you think he could be of help? With you?" Thomas blinked. "What are you saying about him being done with the force?" "They claimed it was due to too much trauma. But Valor has never connected like this with anyone before. If you wish to keep him, training would be essential to establish that bond. However, I believe he has already made his choice." Initially, Thomas did not respond. He kept his gaze fixed on the dog, who met his stare unflinchingly. An unspoken understanding passed between them, something profound that transcended words. Finally, Thomas murmured, "Oh, if he's willing, I won't let him go." At that moment, a sudden bark broke the silence, a short, controlled sound from Valor. He jumped up quickly, muscles taut, ears back and nose raised. Rachel sprang to her feet. "What's wrong, boy?" Another bark followed, this one louder and more urgent. Then a quiet, clinking sound of metal came from the back of the building. Thomas, despite the agony coursing through his legs, remarked, "And that was the garage door," as he reached for the radio on the bench. Just as he was about to push the button, the power cut out, and darkness enveloped everything. Rachel pulled out her flashlight, its unsteady beam illuminating the room in a narrow circle. "Won't stay here," she instructed, "but I'll go take a look." "But, however," Valor growled, producing a deep guttural noise as he stepped in front of the door. Rachel paused. Thomas spoke calmly. "Henry doesn't want you to go by yourself." Outside, a figure darted past the window, too swift to identify. Moments later, the sound of shattering glass resonated from the far end of the station. Rachel raised her radio. "Can we have an intruder at the south entrance? Repeat, south entrance." But before she could complete the message, a loud bang reverberated through the hallway. Thomas grabbed the nearest weapon, an old hatchet hanging on the wall. "I need to move." Valor was already ahead, guiding them with keen eyes and a low stance. They proceeded quietly through the narrow corridor, passing the sleeping quarters and the mess hall. The backup generator had not yet activated. Each step felt like a tick of a countdown. Then they heard it, a voice, low and male, nearby. "I told you he wouldn't die out there." Thomas's blood ran cold. They were back, and this time they intended to leave no witnesses. The sound of footsteps echoed against the cold concrete walls, slow and deliberate. The intruder inside the ranger station showed no rush. They were self-assured, too self-assured. Thomas tightened his grip on the hatchet. Every muscle in his weary body ached, but adrenaline pushed through the pain. Valor moved alongside him like a shadow, body low and every step purposeful. Rachel followed closely behind, her flashlight cutting through the dark hallway in brief, controlled flashes, with her sidearm now drawn. They reached the supply room first, which was empty, then moved to the south hallway, quiet. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of breathing came from behind the door to the generator room. Thomas raised his hand to signal for silence. Valor's ears perked up. His body jerked and became rigid. He felt trapped. Thomas leaned in towards Rachel and murmured, "We're going to open that door. We have no idea what's on the other side. Are you ready?" Rachel gave a single nod, her finger tightening around the trigger. Taking a deep breath, Thomas kicked the door open. It was empty. At least, that's how it appeared. The light from Rachel's flashlight swept across the room, revealing some tools, a broken chair, and a tipped-over oil can. Suddenly, there was a flash of metal. "Get back!" Rachel yelled just as a man lunged out from behind the generator, swinging a crowbar. Thomas ducked just in time, the metal slicing through the air where his head had been moments before. Valor didn't hesitate. He charged forward, snapping his jaws onto the attacker's arm, forcing the crowbar to drop with a loud crash. The man yelled in anger, not fear. "Dumb dog," he sneered. Yet Valor maintained his grip. Thomas seized the man's other arm and slammed him against the wall, holding him down. "You were meant to kill me and just leave, right?" he growled. The intruder fought back, but Thomas's weight and Valor's hold left him powerless. Rachel hurriedly cuffed the man, calmly reading his rights, but as the man spat blood onto the ground, he smirked. "Do you think I'm the only one?" Thomas stopped in his tracks. "Check the area," Rachel commanded. They left the restrained man behind and quickly hurried into the hallway. Outside, flashlights flickered in the distance. More movement, more shadows, and then gunshots. Pop, pop, pop. A deputy's voice crackled over the station radio from the west side. "Hun, they're breaking into the vehicle garage." Thomas turned to Rachel. "They're not after me anymore. They want to wipe everything out." And Valor barked sharply, urgent, and raced toward the main entrance. Without thinking, Thomas followed. Through the side window, he spotted two masked figures forcing their way into the garage, weapons ready. One of the snowmobiles was already hot-wired and roaring. "They're trying to escape through the North Ridge," Rachel said. "If they get into those woods, we won't be able to catch them." Thomas glanced at Valor. "Can you stop them?" Almost as if responding, Valor dashed through the emergency exit, his paws barely touching the ground as he disappeared into the snowy night. Thomas and Rachel hurried after him, the snow crunching beneath their feet as the wind whistled through the trees. In the clearing beyond the garage, headlights illuminated the area. One of the intruders had hopped onto the snowmobile, revving the engine with excitement. But just as he turned to speed away, Valor crashed into him, hitting him in the chest. The man cried out as he was flung off the vehicle, landing in a pile of snow. The second figure raised a weapon, but Thomas reacted quicker. He threw the hatchet, and the handle impacted the gunman's end, sending the weapon soaring. Rachel took him down shortly after the confrontation concluded as swiftly as it had started seconds later. Deputies arrived, handcuffing the remaining intruders and securing the area. Thomas was in the snow, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His clothes were drenched, his body trembling, and then he spotted Valor. The dog approached him, limping due to a bullet that just skimmed his leg yet remained proud and upright. Thomas knelt in the snow and opened his arms. Valor moved directly to him. Resting his head on Thomas's chest, "Sue came through for us once more," Thomas whispered as he held him tightly. "And you protected everyone." However, as the moment settled, Thomas sensed a deeper change within him. This was no longer just about being rescued. It was about having a purpose once again. The ranger station was secure, but the atmosphere inside had transformed. Deputies were moving slowly, speaking quietly. The prisoners had been kept apart and placed in custody, while Valor received treatment for his injury. A clean graze that hadn't penetrated muscle but still resulted in a bandaged leg and a hero's downtime. Thomas sat next to him on the medical bay floor, gently placing his hand on the dog's chest. Valor's breathing was steady and rhythmic, his eyes fixed on the door as if expecting further threats. Thomas did not feel safe, not at that moment. Rachel entered carefully, carrying a thick file full of incident reports. "Sunday won't say a word," she stated, her voice soft at all three of them. "No names, no fingerprints in the system, no identification." Thomas frowned. "That's illogical. They were familiar with the terrain, our patrol patterns, even where the generator is." Rachel paused before handing him a smaller folder. "That's why I pulled this from the logs. Examine the date." Thomas opened it and squinted. His eyes narrowed. 4 weeks earlier, a civilian contractor was granted temporary access to the north side of the reserve. Name, Jack Melton. Purpose, maintenance for the wildlife cameras. The only issue was that Thomas had never authorized it, and the signature on the document wasn't his. He looked up at Rachel. "Someone falsified this." Rachel nodded. "And it wasn't just anyone, it was someone with internal access." Thomas's jaw tightened. "You're suggesting this originated from within?" Rachel didn't answer. She didn't need to that night, after the station had settled down. Thomas stepped outside for some fresh air. Snow continued to fall gently, covering the world in a misleading tranquility. Valor limped beside him, his tail gently swaying, his nose twitching as he scanned the distance. Then they noticed him. Sheriff Dalton standing alone near the northern perimeter, facing the woods. Thomas hesitated. "That's odd." Dalton turned at the sound of their footsteps, forcing a smile. "Couldn't find sleep either." "Something like that," Thomas replied. His eyes narrowing, Dalton gestured toward the trees. "Funny, isn't it? After all these years out here, the greatest danger was never the animals." Thomas remained silent. Dalton sighed and moved closer. "They were just trying to negotiate. I didn't expect them to take it that far. Chain you up like that wasn't what we planned." Thomas froze as the realization hit him. It crept into his mind like a poisonous substance. "You," he murmured. "It was you." Dalton's expression twisted, not from remorse, but from fatigue. "You were hindering progress. You kept obstructing permits and unearthing reports that should have remained hidden. They offered money just to ignore it. That was the intent." Thomas's fists tightened in anger. "You abandoned me to die," Dalton coldly agreed. "Yes, I didn't believe you would make it. No one could have survived that storm." Then he directed his gaze at Valor. "But I didn't anticipate him." And Valor growled softly, his body tense. Dalton edged back slowly. "Oh, you can walk away from this. I can ensure that no more issues come your way. You and that dog could receive a medal, retire early, and nobody would find out." However, Thomas was already shaking his head. "Don't you believe I'll remain silent after all of this?" Dalton's hand moved to his belt, but it was a sluggish movement. Valor sprang into action before he could draw his weapon. The sheriff fell to the ground with a grunt, pinned down by 100 pounds of trained muscle. Yet this time, Thomas did not command the dog to cease. He advanced and locked eyes with Dalton. "You betrayed your oath. You betrayed me." By the time Rachel and the deputies showed up, the truth was already revealing itself. Thomas presented the forged documents, while Rachel went over the station logs, with Valor still beside Thomas, watching everything closely. The man who had led them for over a decade was taken into custody in silence. As the doors closed behind Dalton, Thomas understood that the harm extended deeper than mere betrayal. He turned to Rachel and said, "Everything he touched is tainted. Each permit, every report. We need to start fresh." Rachel agreed. "Well, then we will do it together." And Thomas glanced at Valor, and not without him. But something within Valor had shifted. That night, he anxiously paced the station. His instincts were razor sharp, his ears perked up. Thomas sat next to him as the fire popped in the background. He sensed it before we all did. Valor appeared unaffected, but his gaze remained fixed on the shadows outside. Thomas sensed that this was not over. In the days that followed, silence and snowfall weighed heavily. Investigators from the state capitol arrived, thoroughly, searching every inch of the ranger station, unearthing permits, exploring history, and exposing the lies Dalton had kept hidden for years. The truth emerged in bits and pieces. A web of illegal land transactions allowed criminal organizations to take root, while rangers had quietly been marginalized or silenced. Thomas provided statement after statement, his voice firm, though his eyes betrayed his fatigue. The betrayal still throbbed in his mind like an old injury. He had placed his trust in Dalton for many years, and they had worked together closely. Next to each other, they constructed cabins, tackled wildfires together, and yet the individual who had previously given him his badge abandoned him to perish, bound like a beast. However, Valor remained at his side unwaveringly. He accompanied Thomas throughout every interview, every briefing, and every silent stroll through the snowy night. The deputies began to view him not merely as a dog. They started to treat him as a comrade, a brother, something that existed between legend and reality. On the third night following Dalton's arrest, Thomas stood by the fenced boundary of the station grounds. For once the sky was clear, and the stars shimmered coldly above the treetops. His breath formed slow clouds in the chilly air. Rachel approached him quietly. "Onea's suggesting a transfer for you," she stated, back to Helena. "With full benefits, a counseling position, desk duties." Initially, Thomas did not respond. His gaze fell upon Valor, who rested at his feet, wagging his tail once when their eyes met. "Do I look like someone suited for a desk job?" he finally replied. Rachel smiled wearily. "I didn't think so," he said, glancing at her. "Oh, they won't back off, will they?" Rachel's smile disappeared. "Tano, there is too much money hidden in these woods. Numerous names we haven't revealed yet, and many of them are still out there." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then I'll stay." Rachel handed him an envelope. "So I expected you'd say that. This is your official transfer to the K9 Division if you wish to take it. Valor has been cleared to come back under your command." With careful hands, Thomas opened the envelope. Inside lay a neat file with his name, Valor's name, and a unit title, Ranger Tactical K9 Unit Echo. "Do you really believe I am suitable for this?" he inquired. Rachel glanced between him and the dog. "And I think you're already qualified." Thomas knelt beside Valor, stroking his thick fur. "What do you think, partner?" Valor replied with a soft bark, a low, confident sound, one that indicated agreement. But as days went by, the tranquility felt increasingly fragile. The sensation of being watched returned. Deputies reported strange occurrences, tracks in the snow not resembling any wildlife, equipment displaced, and brief interruptions in radio signals during the night. Nothing definitive, but enough to disturb even the most experienced rangers. Then, late one night, while Thomas was alone examining reports in the communications cabin, the security monitor flickered out. Static replaced the image, followed by darkness. He attempted to restore the feed, but something disrupted the signal. At that moment, Valor stood alert, ears perked, muscles tight. A second later, the emergency lights outside came on. Thomas stepped into the cold, flashlight in one hand and his service weapon at his side. Valor moved ahead, tail low, nose to the air. They arrived at the boundary of the station's fence. Nothing, just snow, trees, and silence, until they heard it, a faint clink of chains, the very metallic rattle that disturbed Thomas's dreams. He turned his head to the right just as a shadow moved behind a tree. "Hey!" Thomas shouted. "Show yourself." No answer, just the gentle rustling of the wind, and Snow Valor let out a low, protective growl. Just before the shadow disappeared completely into the darkness, a flash of silver caught the moon's rays, a badge. A chill ran through Thomas. It was far from over. Someone was lingering, still observing from within. That night, Thomas found it hard to sleep, as the vision of the strange badge reflecting in the moonlight troubled his mind. He was aware of its implications. Dalton was not acting alone. Another person, clad in uniform and with the right access, was still operating from the inside. By dawn, the snowfall had ceased, leaving the woods unsettlingly quiet beneath a pale winter sky. Rachel gathered a small team to respond, but the intruder's traces had been skillfully concealed. Whoever approached the station did so with military exactness. Nevertheless, Thomas felt a heaviness in his chest. He looked at Valor, who had been fixated on the treetops since the previous night. Their connection had evolved beyond mere instinct. It was trust built through survival. Thomas didn't need spoken words to grasp what Valor sensed. Something was on the horizon. Later that day, Thomas and Rachel drove to one of the unused patrol cabins located at the margin of Sector 9, a site few dared to visit in winter. Some months ago, Dalton had declared the cabin unsafe for winter use, and no one had challenged this decision. Yet something inside Thomas urged him to start there. Upon arrival, Valor leaped from the truck before it had fully stopped, sniffing the air, his fur standing on end. Inside the cabin, the wood stove lay cold, but fresh footprints were visible in the snow nearby, and the lock had been broken and carelessly resealed. Rachel readied her weapon. "We're not alone." Thomas moved silently, with Valor close by, each step taken with caution. They reached the back room when suddenly the gunshot rang out, breaking the stillness and splintering the wooden frame of the cabin. Rachel ducked behind the door, while Thomas dove to the side, yet the shot hadn't been aimed at them. Instead, it struck Valor. A sharp cry broke the air as the dog fell onto his side, his leg quickly becoming soaked in blood. Thomas rushed towards him, his heart racing. "Stay with me, buddy, stay with me," he urged softly while applying pressure to the wound. The shooter emerged from the shadows, face uncovered. It was a young deputy, Mark Howie, a trusted ally of Dalton's. "And should have stayed dead, Ranger," he sneered. "You think locking up Dalton changed anything? He was merely a figurehead. I'm the one who orchestrated this." Thomas stood up slowly, blood on his hands. "Who shot him?" "You shot my dog." I did not waver. "That dog cost us." Rachel stealthily followed him down the side corridor without being noticed. Thomas engaged him in conversation. "Why, Haley, why betray your own?" he taunted. "Do you really think this? Land matters to them? To the government it's merely property. I made it valuable." "But at what cost?" Thomas countered. "Lives, honor, your badge. Don't act as if you wouldn't have done the identical thing." "Pashai," hissed Haley. That was the moment Rachel took action. With 2 swift steps, she struck Haley behind the knee, sending him crashing to the ground. She secured him with handcuffs before he could even attempt to grab his weapon. Thomas hurried back to Valor, panic surging within him. The dog was struggling to breathe but was still alive. "We need to move immediately," Rachel urged. "I will contact the evacuation team." Thomas gently wrapped Valor in his jacket and lifted him. "Don't you dare give up on me," he murmured. "Not now." A few hours later, the veterinary team at the state K-9 facility confirmed that the bullet had missed Valor's vital organs by mere inches. Surgery would be required, but he was going to. Land matters to them. To the government, it's merely property. I made it valuable. But at what cost? Thomas countered. Me, lives, honor, your badge. Don't act as if you wouldn't have done the identical thing. She hissed Haley. That was the moment Rachel took action. With 2 swift steps, she struck Haley behind the knee, sending him crashing to the ground. She secured him with handcuffs before he could even attempt to grab his weapon. Thomas hurried back to Valor, panic surging within him. The dog was struggling to breathe but was still alive. "We need to move immediately," Rachel urged. "I will contact the evacuation team." Thomas gently wrapped Valor in his jacket and lifted him. "Don't you dare give up on me," he murmured. "Not now." A few hours later, the veterinary team at the state K-9 facility confirmed that the bullet had missed Valor's vital organs by mere inches. Surgery would be required, but he was going to make it. Thomas remained at his side throughout the whole ordeal. The tale of the restrained ranger and the K-9 that rescued him spread rapidly. News outlets arrived, cameras captured the moment, and Thomas shared his story, not as a victim, but as a representative for those who protect, serve, and sacrifice without seeking praise. When Valor finally regained consciousness after surgery, he looked straight at Thomas and gave a slow, tired wag of his tail. It may have been faint, but it was still there. Thomas beamed through his tears. "When you're coming home, partner." Weeks flew by. The forest transitioned into spring. A new patrol unit was established, clean and vetted, rising from the remnants of treachery. Thomas was appointed as the leader of the Ekshok-9 unit, while Rachel took charge of station operations. And Valor returned to work. Older, slightly slower, but stronger than before. During every patrol they walked side by side, and every individual they protected recognized that if danger ever returned, loyalty would be ready with keen eyes and an unwavering heart. If this story moved you, remember that true bravery doesn't don a cape. It walks on 4 legs and never lets you down. Subscribe to the channel, give a like, and share this video with someone who needs to believe in loyalty.